Jeffrey Lipsius is the director of the Inner Game School of Sales Leadership with Timothy Gallwey and the author of the award-winning book, Selling to the Point. He's one of only a handful of people who have been certified by Timothy Gallwey to be an inner game facilitator and coach. Timothy Gallwey is often referred to as the father of modern coaching. He created the inner game method in the 1970s. It transformed the field of performance coaching. Jeffrey co-facilitates inner game train the trainer workshops, which certifies coaches to train others on the inner game method. For the past 30 years, Jeffrey worked directly with Timothy Gallwey to develop an inner game approach to sales leadership. The application of inner game for sales leadership is one of the few inner game applications officially recognized by Timothy Gallwey's Inner Game School. Jeffrey and Tim train sales forces together worldwide to achieve peak selling performance. Jeffrey is a lifelong learner who studied systems thinking. He's an admirer of Peter Senge's work and participated in several systems thinking in action conferences. We're glad that in this podcast today we had directly to be able to listen to Jeffrey's experience as not just a coach but a practitioner of the inner game of life. He shared with us how meaningful and how fulfilling it is to be able to be clear what one is up to in life, and how that then supports naturally the learning and enthusiasm for whatever one has to be doing in life, whether it's at work, with family, in relationships. So come join us in this podcast and listen and dwell deeply into the mastery effect and how Jeffrey Lipsius has experienced it for himself and has lived a life of peak performance, inner and outer.
Hello, I'm Dr. Ramesh Ramachandra, the founder of Talent Leadership Crucible, and today I'm here to co-host a new podcast called The Mastery Effect.
Hello, my name is Poorani Thanusha, and I'm the principal consultant with Talent and Leadership Crucible. I'm also the co-founder of Impact Velocity, and I'm really happy to be here with Dr. Ramesh on this new series podcast, The Mastery Effect. And we are very glad to welcome our guest, Jeffrey Lipsius.
Welcome to Mastery Effect Podcast, Jeffrey. Poorani and myself, we are very excited that you can be one of our guests to decode personal mastery for our listeners, as we are also hosting the Society for Organizational Learning's annual conference in Vietnam in September this year.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Welcome, Jeffrey.
Jeffrey, tell us a little bit about your journey in this space.
Yes, okay. Well, early in my life, actually back when I was in college a long time ago, I got very clear on the difference between the inner and the outer. Okay, that you can have outer aspirations and outer goals and achieve things on the outside, but there's also a path going on in the inside at the same time, which also needs to be nurtured and needs our awareness. And we've been exposed mostly to an externally focused world where outer achievements are what seem to be most valued, and undervalued are the achievements that take place within us, the happiness, the learning, the mastery, because you could have mastery on the outside and you could have mastery on the inside. Right. Started as a tennis player back in my college days, and I realized that I wasn't going to fully achieve my potential as a tennis player on the outside unless I achieved mastery on the inside. So in tennis, mastery on the outside is having a better score. on the inside, mastery in tennis is playing up to your full potential. So I realized early on, if I play up to my full potential as a tennis player, I don't have to worry about the score. I don't have to worry about outer mastery. That takes care of itself if I focus on achieving inner mastery. And so that's been a constant theme throughout my life, not just in tennis, but also in sales, in my personal relationships, in my personal growth process. That's how I could sum up what I've learned over these 7 decades.
Wow. That's really amazing to hear your framework of going inner versus outer. What struck me was you talked about the achievement on the inner, which is accomplishment, fulfillment, happiness, learning, and even mastery. I guess what you're saying is that the game for us in the inner side is all about achieving the fullest potential that we can be.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so there's no scoreboard as such.
The scoreboard on the inside is your feeling of fulfillment.
Right.
If you feel fulfilled, you're hitting 100. If you're feeling fulfilled, you have a very high score. If you're feeling unfulfilled, then raise your score. Do things that are going to have you get the most out of this life.
Curious about this feeling of fulfillment, right? Because I don't know whether sometimes that's get mistaken with like I'm happy, like oh I did good. Like what is that ultimately that measure of the fulfillment, right? Because I still suspect that we look outward to validate that fulfillment still, right? So how do you measure still? What's that experience of fulfillment that is truly the inner fulfillment?
Well, how do you know when you drank enough water?
Mm.
You know. You feel fulfilled. You just know. I mean, feelings come with unequivocal knowing. Okay.
Mm.
If I said to you, I'm feeling hungry. And if you ask me, well, Jeff, how do you know you're hungry? Well, that's a silly question. Of course, I know I'm hungry because that's what I feel.
Right.
When you're fulfilled, you know.
Thank you so much for that. And I know that you are now coaching a little granddaughter who's 5 or 6 to
Yeah.
become a tennis star.
Mhm.
And how does that translate to the outer world? So perhaps we can have this conversation about the outer.
Yeah, well, it's interesting with children because they're naturally internally focused. So they're going to have fun unless you somehow interfere. So I don't have to give her lessons. I don't have to teach her. I don't have to get her to do things a certain way. As long as she's having fun playing tennis, she's going to figure it out. So one of the things that I did is I'm having her hit the ball very hard and not think about where it lands. And what I discovered is that she happens to have a natural two-handed forehand. I don't know if you know much about tennis, but if you go to a tennis lesson, a tennis teacher is going to show you a forehand to hit it with one hand. They're going to teach you to hit a one-handed forehand, and this is what you're supposed to do. And I just let her do things naturally. Everybody's brain is different. Everyone has different centers of gravity. Everybody has different strengths. Some people are left-handed, some people are right-handed, some people are ambidextrous. How do you know what's going to be right for you? well, you have fun and you learn. So when I'm playing with her, I'm not the teacher, I'm the learner. And I'm wanting to see what's going to be the most natural with her. And she just has more fun whacking the ball with two hands on the forehand. It's very unusual.
Nice.
You know, if you there was a very exciting tennis match on television, you know, the French Open, and you see everybody hits the ball differently when they're pros. You have all different kinds of styles. So there's no one right way to hit the ball.
So that's interesting because it's almost like a pro comes to a level, right, where they're able to really connect to their own natural style or strength. But maybe when they first started out, they were all said the same thing, right? Learn this way and that way, but somehow they managed to get out of that routine, right? And find themselves and their own style, natural style that fit them.
Yes.
That's
I really believe the pros had to do that kind of discovery on their own.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's a very powerful insight. I never really looked at it from that perspective, but that is that kind of that difference, right? The key difference, because somewhere along the way, they had stumbled into that naturalness, that sense of enjoyment or learning for themselves, regardless of what they had been taught while they were young or just starting out. They just connected to that something very inside of themselves, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Cool.
So, Poorani, I'm dying to ask Jeffrey this question about how does he use this in sales and selling?
Oh, yes. Well, and I discovered this along the way because I first started out in my professional life after I failed in the pros. I didn't make it as a tennis pro, but I learned so much about high-level performance that I was able to take it to sales, and I worked my way up from just a telephone salesperson to be vice president of the whole company, using this personal mastery of finding out what I'm going to be best at. Some of the things I discovered along the way is that I'm an auditory learner. So I would get cassette tapes. It was a vitamin company, and I would get audio files of all these nutrition experts talking.
Right.
And instead of reading books, I would listen, and I would retain the information much more. I was selling supplements to doctors, so they're very sophisticated in their terminology, and I had to really know all the biochemistry behind vitamin supplements. So once I did that, my sales skyrocketed and I became the sales manager. That's when I approached Tim Gallwey. I went from sales manager to vice president, and as vice president, actually, I approached Tim Gallwey and said, let's apply inner game to selling. I already knew the answer was in looking at selling performance on the inside, not on the outside. But this is very counterintuitive. Selling on the inside is not the salesperson's frame of mind. Looking at selling on the inside is the buyer's frame of mind, not the salesperson's frame of mind. That's what everybody gets wrong. Because when I was looking at personal mastery, it's like, well, okay, let's be clear. What's the goal of selling? Well, the goal of selling is buying, not selling. I could sell all day long and not earn any commission, or I could hardly say a word and my customers just somehow happen to buy and I'm rich.
Right.
Really about the buying. So when I was looking at tennis and telling my granddaughter or myself, let's really focus on the ball rather than my doubts, that's focusing on the outer. That's focusing on the ball. It's focusing on the seams of the ball to stop my self-doubts and to get my body clear on what it needs to know in terms of where's the ball in relation to the racket.
Right.
So turn that around to selling. What's your customer's decision process? And where might they be stuck? Where might the customer have self-doubts? Where could they benefit from your influence, helping them make the best decision? Because that's why they feel they're talking to you, the salesperson. They want to talk to a salesperson to help them make a better decision. So you need to focus as a salesperson on the customer's mindset.
Right. So it's interesting. You're sort of bringing to the surface for us to consider that everyone is having a judgment. I'm having a judgment as a salesperson.
Mhm.
And I might be speaking to someone who's my potential buyer, and they have a judgment about whether they should make this purchase or not.
Yeah, so there's two conversations.
Right.
Yeah, actually three conversations. You have conversation A, which is between the salesperson and the customer. Conversation B, between the customer's ears, that's the buying process.
Right.
Conversation C, which is between the salesperson's ears.
Right.
Okay. If a salesperson is talking to the customer and they've got conversation C going on between the salesperson's ears, saying, is this going my way or is this not going my way? That salesperson's distracted.
Right.
Right. Now, if we talk about peak performance, okay, so let's say that you and I are watching a peak performance salesperson right now.
Right.
And you're looking at them and they're doing just a fantastic job selling this customer. Well, one of the things that we would notice as we're observing this is the salesperson is very good at thinking on their feet. Now, that's an American expression for responding well to the unexpected.
Right.
But a salesperson in peak performance will, when the customer says something that was unexpected, the salesperson's going to handle it masterfully. Okay. How would that go if the salesperson is thinking, is this conversation going my way or not going my way? They'll be distracted.
Correct.
They won't be able to respond. They've interfered with their own ability to achieve peak performance as a salesperson. So the same thing applies. It's mindfulness. And by the way, there's an American expression that would be peak performance for a customer. It's called a no-brainer.
Yes.
Okay, so peak performance decision-making from the customer's mindset is termed a no-brainer, where the decision is so clear it's effortless. But the term no-brainer also alludes to a state of inner peace in the mind of the customer, that the customer is actually seeking inner peace in the decisions they make. The opposite of a no-brainer is when a customer is trying to decide. That, like the expressions are, I'm sitting on a fence, I'm of two minds. It's really an unpleasant experience for the customer. And the salesperson is not going to get a sale unless the customer stops trying to decide and starts getting that clarity that they're looking for. So you have a continuum. Every customer is somewhere between trying to decide and a no-brainer.
Oh, that's lovely. That's a visual and effective way to look at the sales process, and not to also personalize it. As a salesperson, we can now understand we're talking to someone on the other side who is trying to decide. Could you introduce Tim Gallwey and his contribution to coaching and this inner game that he developed?
Tim Gallwey, he's my mentor and my friend, and he's known as the father of modern coaching. And he came out with his first book in 1973 called The Inner Game of Tennis. It became the basis for the entire performance coaching movement. Like, if you go to any coaching school to learn coaching skills, the first thing they're going to teach you is inner game principles. So he's been the master of the performance coaching field now for many decades. And it's just been an honor to work with him. I met him as a tennis player. You know, his book was transformational for me in my tennis game. Then when I went into the professional world and became vice president of the company, I was there with Tim to work on sales performance. But what's unique about Tim's inner game method is that it's universally applicable to any kind of performance. And I've spoken to people that use inner game for incredibly diverse things. I was talking to the head surgeon at Harvard Medical School, who uses inner game to teach the physicians surgery, because it enables them to have peak performance. I've spoken to people that use inner game for all different kinds of sports. I mean, the head football coach at the Seattle Seahawks spoke at a recent inner game conference. One of the best winning coaches for the NBA Basketball Association, big inner game fan. You have inner game in many coaching schools, and race car drivers made a movie about how inner game affected them. It's really the most universally applicable approach to peak performance. And I knew if I talked to Tim, we could figure out a way that it will also help in selling. It even helps in personal growth. You know, there could be like an inner game of life.
So if you had to distill the principles of inner game about self one and self two, can you just share a little bit about the concept?
Well, it's really pretty simple. And I kind of described it a little bit when I was talking about my journey. But essentially, Tim is saying that you can't win the outer game unless you win the inner game. And so an example would be if I played Carlos Alcaraz in tennis and he beats me 6-0, 6-1. Now, I lost the outer game.
Yes.
He got a better score. But I got a game off of the world's best tennis player at 70 years old. I feel like I won. I don't feel like a loser at all.
Yeah.
I exceeded my expectations as a tennis player and fulfilled my potential as a tennis player. So that would be an example of losing the outer game, but winning the inner game.
Right.
So that's the first principle. And the second principle is, like I said, you have to trust that if you're going to win the inner game, the outer game will take care of itself. So if I always achieve my best potential as a tennis player, I don't have to worry about the score. That's going to take care of itself. However, and this is the third principle, if I decide to focus on the outer game to get the best score, I'm distracted and it'll interfere with my ability to achieve the inner game.
Right. So when we get the three principles, we are ready to make a choice.
Yes.
In terms of how do we go forward in life, right? Is it the inner game perspective or the outer game perspective?
Yeah. Well, actually, part of inner game is about choice. Because a lot of the decisions we make are what other people would prescribe for us. And it's very hard to determine sometimes what decisions we want and what decisions we're doing to please others. You know, what has been our conditioning?
Yes.
Conditioning for what we should want and what do we really want? And that's part of winning the inner game of life, is being able to gain that clarity.
Poorani, I can see that you're bursting to ask a few questions.
If we were really starting to focus on the inner self, what key practice or where would you start that journey to personal mastery, to the inner game of life?
Okay, let's talk about inner game of life. So what's the inner game and what's the outer game of life? If I was to say to you, how's life? You would probably give me the outer game description. You would say something like, oh, things are going well. We're getting a lot of interest in the systems thinking, Society for Organizational Learning Conference, and things are going well here. And you describe to me the different circumstances that are taking place right now and the different things that you're doing. That's the outer game of life. Now, if I said to you, I have to get off this call. I'm sorry, but I just got word that my neighbor got in a horrible motorcycle accident and he's in the intensive care, clinging to life. Okay, that's the inner meaning of life, right? We're talking about existence.
Yes.
As opposed to the circumstances.
Right.
So of the two meanings of life, the inner, which is existence itself, and the outer, which is things we're doing during the day, which one is most important?
Well, if you're asking me, then we would say the existence, right? Because if that existence is not existing, then whatever else doesn't make any difference, right?
Exactly.
That has no.
Yeah, obviously. There would be no circumstances of your life.
Yeah.
You would just be a memory. But throughout the day, what do you focus on more? The inner or the outer?
Outer.
Yeah, the outer.
Yeah.
Even though we know the inner is more important.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do? Tim Gallwey has a term that he calls looking from.
Okay.
So being aware of the value of life itself and that gratitude and that joy for having it, we can do all the things that we're still doing, looking from that perspective. And it changes how we go about things. The circumstances on the outside stay the same, we look at them differently. We look at them with a different perspective. And that's, since we brought it up, the inner game of life.
Looking at personal mastery and the inner game of life, I was like super curious.
Yes.
Because I think to some extent, most of us think we already know about the sales life and running a company. And so we've got models and we've got best practices out there, right? And it's so challenging for people, in my experience, when you say well, focus on the inner game, but they'll say, well, what about the KPIs? What about the profit? I have to focus there, and it's a huge challenge, right? Right. So what do you see as the key challenges that typically someone would face in the journey of the inner game of life, or personal mastery?
Yeah, I would say one of the big key challenges is being clear about who you are rather than what people are prescribing for you. And that's very difficult to do, because we do want to please people. And we just feel like, okay, well, I'm doing this for somebody else and I'm really not enjoying it, but eventually it'll pay off. And if you're being true to yourself, you would feel enjoyment, you would feel that fulfillment at the moment. You're not only enjoying doing the task, but you're also enjoying yourself doing the task.
Yeah.
See, every task, you're talking about KPIs and you're talking about goals. And there's no problem achieving outer goals.
Yeah.
But there's also an inner goal. So if you're doing a project, you're getting something done on the outside. On the inside, you're evolving as a person. You're learning something during the course of doing this project. Yeah, I mean, that's why, I mean, at school, they'll ask you to do a term paper. It's not to produce a good term paper so much as to, the learning that you do in the process, doing all the research. It's the same like working with a team that you haven't worked with before. You're all doing a project together, but you're also learning how to work with these people for other projects and how to become a good team, an optimal team member, highly skilled in working in teams. That's on the inside, what you're learning, while you're doing the project on the outside, which is pleasing the stakeholder.
I was wondering about self-awareness, because it begs the question that I have to have some amount of self-awareness to be able to do that switch, or maybe some practice like mindfulness or whatever that, or maybe it's even a crisis.
Well, sometimes it just, somebody has to see that what they're doing is not working and they want to try something new.
Right.
Other times it might be, hearing this podcast, or just feeling that they feel empty at what they're doing. It seems so much stress, and then the project is finally done and it doesn't feel rewarding. And, these are all clues that, well, there's another path, or there's more that you could choose to accomplish without changing your job on the outside.
Maybe this is a good time to ask Jeffrey about his book.
The first book I wrote, I have it right here, is on selling.
That's
Okay.
right.
Nice.
And that's Tim Gallwey wrote the foreword, which was very nice of him. The new book I'm writing is entirely different, having to do with meditating, to using a new tool to help people progress from meditation to enlightenment. It has to do with leveraging brain neuroplasticity. So we meditate, and meditation changes the brain in many ways. Right? And I found a way that you could speed up that process of evolving your brain by tapping into early childhood memories. And I found this by accident. I wasn't trying to do this. I was actually doing my meditation practice. And one day a childhood memory came to me and it transformed everything. And I'd been meditating for 60 years before I had this memory. And once I had this memory, everything completely changed. It was like instant. So what I want to do is introduce this to the world. For me, it was an accident, but now I can tell people, hey, this really works for meditators to want to go deeper in a more accelerated time period, accessing childhood memories, because I discovered that babies and young toddlers are enlightened. They're in a constant enlightened state. And so that was us. And infants and small toddlers, they found out, form memories. We don't remember them. You know, our first year of life, the things that happen in our first year of life, because we don't have the right triggers. Well, what I discovered is that since infants and children are enlightened, a deep meditation practice is exactly that memory trigger. And now, when you're meditating, you're not going to do something, you're not going to a new consciousness, you're going to an original consciousness that you already had before. And when it becomes, when you realize that's that consciousness that you go to in meditation was who you were born as. You see, that's really you. That's the real you. And so it's a way of discovering who you really are experientially, because you've had that consciousness already.
So wonderful, Jeff.
Yeah. It hasn't gone away. Those same parts of your brain that were dominating as an infant are still there, just in the background. And you could tap into it through deep meditation. So nobody's thought of this before. So I'm introducing this to the world. I hope people really get a lot out of it.
Wow, that's so wonderful to hear. You answered that question that I had to an earlier piece of our conversation about knowing who we really are, right? And that kind of ties that up. That there's so many pathways today of people talking about discovering who we are. I mean, we talk about discovering our purpose, the true self, right? It's lovely to hear that your book is going to cover that.
Well, the important thing, though, is that I'm talking about something that's experiential. So I just remembered when I was 4 years old, the first time I started having thoughts. And I remember this very clearly because it got me scared that words were coming in my head for the first time. And so I asked my grandmother about it. And I remember this whole conversation I had with my grandmother. She's saying, no, don't worry, that's just your mind thinking. But having that memory gives you an unmistakable clarity about those thoughts imposing themselves in our consciousness 4 years after we were born. So I know that's not me because I remember when it emerged. So it's really clear from an inner and an experiential standpoint. It's not like I read it in a book.
Yeah.
And that's why I said it changed everything. There's nothing like learning from direct experience.
What you're saying is we go back to our true self or the
Yes.
original consciousness, really,
Yeah.
right? There's
Yeah.
nothing new outside of ourselves, but we're just actually reconnecting to the true original self.
Yeah. One thing I say in the book is that we have this original self, and then we have this acquired self.
Ah,
Okay. And the thing I say in the book that's important is don't judge the acquired self as bad, because we need an acquired self. We just have to understand its rightful place. You need an acquired self to decide if you're going to make a left-hand turn or a right-hand turn. You need an acquired self to be able to communicate with people. And I use this analogy in the book. The word splash is not the sound of jumping in water. Two different things. The sound of jumping in water is not splash.
right.
But we use the word splash to symbolize jumping in water, the sound. Now, we don't say the word splash, it's fake, it's bad, because we need a way to communicate that to other people. As long as we understand it's not real, it's not really the sound of jumping in a swimming pool. Well, the same thing, there's an original self that's truly us, who we were born as, and has all kinds of wisdom, very important wisdom. As a matter of fact, remember when I said, what's more important? What do we think about during the day? The outer definition of life or the inner definition of life? And we said, well, we're always thinking about the outer definition of life, even though the inner definition is more important.
Yes.
Well, infants know and focus throughout the day on the inner definition of life. That's wisdom that they have, that we've abdicated, and going and valuing that original consciousness. We gain that wisdom back.
Oh, really profound. And I love the use of the word abdicate, right?
Yeah.
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 And so reclaiming that is really also our choice.
Yes. Yeah. Which self do we value as truly us, and which one do we choose? There's no right or wrong choice.
Correct.
Some people just want to live and prioritize their acquired selves, and that's fine. The key is that you experience both. You can't make a choice without experiencing both and then deciding.
What's your definition of collective consciousness?
Collective consciousness. Well, shared beliefs, values, moral attitudes that unite people in society. The shared value that I'm talking about here is loving a baby. That's universal.
Right.
People love their babies. Even dictators who would mistreat other people's babies love their own. And you have these dictators who try to create these dynasties where the son is going to take over, and then the grandson, in North Korea, or so in Syria. I mean, where people they have a love for their children. It's universal. So that is what I can say is a very basic collective consciousness that I think we could leverage as a value, as a universal value among people, as a start.
And use that to build up, right? For it to become a shared value universally and expand that to include other things and other people.
Well, yeah, you see, because we have an inner baby that needs our love. And so people value their inner child the way they value their outer child. Right? Now they're gaining a clarity of something that goes beyond accumulating wealth. And so that's a universal value. That's a collective consciousness that I think could really make a difference.
Poorani, how about asking Jeff some of those unique questions?
What's one belief about personal mastery that you held 10 years ago that you no longer believe?
That I no longer believe?
Yeah, that you no longer believe. So maybe, in the early part of your journey, there's something that you believed that this is how it should be and must be. And today, that's no longer how you see it and no longer what you believe.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, this is interesting because one thing that Tim Gallwey says is don't limit yourself by your goals. Whatever you imagine, you can go beyond that because peak performance is always a surprise. So, one of the things, I was vice president of this company, and I thought, okay, that's everything. And at some point I realized, this isn't really fulfilling. I don't like the person I have to be sometimes, in order to do this job. And I decided to leave, which is something that a few years earlier I wouldn't imagine doing. But I left because I knew I had a different path. I knew I had to focus on my inner game and what was going to be best for my personal growth and my personal mastery.
Wonderful. So at that moment, you no longer believed or held on that by just focusing on the outer game or the focus, that you would get whatever you needed in the inner game to have that sense of fulfillment. And then you had to let that go and really take on fully the inner game of yourself, right? And let whatever outer game needs to emerge.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I realized that, being vice president, was a nice pat on the back. Everybody around me was, acting like, great, I've reached this height, but I didn't feel that I really was fulfilling my own dream. I mean, being vice president was about fulfilling the president's dream. And I had my own dreams.
What is that one thing about your daily life that would surprise people?
They may be surprised that I meditate 3 hours a day.
Oh, yes, for sure.
For 60 years.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
3 hours a day. Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's formal meditation. And then with that, I'm able to do my things looking from, being in that center. I could do other things. As vice president, it was very hard. I did it. It was 2 hours in the morning and 1 hour at night, but it was hard. I had to drink a lot of coffee.
If you lost everything today, your reputation, your network, your success, how would you rebuild your mastery from scratch?
Well, there's two different things, right? I mean, my reputation and those things are outer. Those aren't my mastery.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my mastery would be untouched. It would be like throwing rocks at the sky.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey, for this really thought-provoking 1 hour that we've spent together.
Yeah, this was fun. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank
See,
you.
it's fun. That's important.
Wonderful. So that brings us to the end of this wonderful podcast session. Thank you once again. I'm sure all our listeners listening into this podcast will certainly take away some insight, lots of insights, just as we have. And so really grateful for the time and the wisdom you shared with us, Jeffrey.
No, thank you very much, Poorani and Dr. Ramesh.